Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Defense Innovation Board's public meeting. My name is Colleen Laughlin, and I am the designated federal officer for the Defense Innovation Board. For those in the room, if you've not done so already, please silence your phones. Today's meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend the meeting virtually. This meeting was notified in the Federal Register Notice according to the Federal Advisory Committee Act requirements. Public was offered an opportunity to submit comments to the website. Time permitting, we will read through those. If not, we will post them. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn over to our chair, Mr. Michael Bloomberg, for opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Colleen, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Speaking on behalf of my fellow board members, we are all honored to be here and to have the opportunity to bring new ideas to the Department of Defense as it works to protect our country, keep our service members safe, and support our allies. This month, the world will mark a year since the start of Russia's war against the Ukraine. We have learned a lot in that time, both from the organizational and tactical challenges facing the Russian army and the strength, courage, and determination of the Ukrainian people. And we have seen how they use new technology and how it has been critical to their successes. For instance, information and communication systems are allowing decisions to be made on the edge of the battlefield faster than ever. Commercial drones are being used in innovative new ways. Some of that technology has been supported by the United States. Our Department of Defense puts a high priority on maintaining its technological edge, and supporting that push for innovation is the mission of this board. To get started today, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our newest board member, Charles Phillips. Charles, you should know, is a former Marine and now a technology leader and investor. He is also the co-founder and managing partner of an investment firm called Recognize. He brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the board, and we are glad to have him. Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words?
It's an honor to participate, and we've been learning a lot already.
Thank you. The board has been hard at work on the two topics Secretary Austin assigned us: the National Defense Science and Technology Strategy and the Strategic Investment Capital. At our last meeting, we asked Mac Thornberry to chair the former and Will Roper to chair the latter. Mac is unable to join with us today, so I'm going to ask Ryan Swan to share an update first, followed by Will. Ryan?
Thank you, Mike. And like Mike said, I'll provide an update to the S&T strategy, for the S&T strategy review. I'm joined on that task force with Dr. Barabino and as well as Admiral Mullen. Secretary asked DIB for insights on the DoD's forthcoming National Defense and S&T strategy that was mandated by Congress. I believe this is the first ever DoD national strategy, and we're eager for the board to provide impactful advice. The strategy can be thought of as DoD's innovation strategy, meaning it sets a vision and a framework for how we are to build a competitive and enduring advantage. We've received initial briefings from strategy writing team on how DoD is thinking about the development, implementation, and the longer term impact. We also received briefs from across the DoD S&T enterprise to learn about key issues, mission, resources, and challenges. We met with services, the Joint Staff, as well as Indo-PACOM, as well as OSD, to understand how the strategy will structure priorities, incentives, and outcomes. We heard from labs, warfighter requirements, development teams, and capability experimentation teams on the requirements and the needs that are in front of us. The big takeaways are the importance of resources, talent, transition, and how to optimize the system for speed and delivery of capabilities. And we ultimately want to understand how the S&T enterprise is set up to efficiently and effectively deliver these capabilities to the warfighter. Let me turn now to Dr. Barbino, as well as Admiral Mullen, for some comment.
Thank you, Ryan. We really did receive great briefs. I noted the multitude of DoD organizations and stakeholders. What I'm most curious about are the seams across and between. And to your comment, are they effective and are they efficient? Well, I hope this strategy addresses the broader innovation ecosystem, academia, private sector, and government, and outlines how DoD can deepen and leverage those. I'd also like to see the strategy address talent and culture, a tall order, because we know culture is the hardest thing to change. But there's so much talent, whether coming out of universities or the private sector, and it would be great to create larger pipelines into national security.
Thanks, Ryan and Gilda. And certainly I agree, or we agree with really wanting to be impactful what we're looking at. The strategies are good, but implementation and metrics is how strategy delivers. And I agree with Gilda, we have to change the culture, which is a tough culture. This affects everything from speed to risk tolerance, which are key. And in addition, we've got to attract talent. We need the best and the brightest in our nation, quite frankly, and a culture they want to be a part of. Bottom line is strategy is important, but the system has to deliver game-changing advantages for our warfighter at speed, and proof will be in the implementation.
Thank you. I don't know other board members. This is the opportunity where you've heard from some of your colleagues who are looking at these issues, if there are sort of broad thoughts as they're digging into the National Defense S&T strategy kind of assessment.
Have any surprises or pleasant or unpleasant in your first set of reviews? Or I know one review is not a report made, but what did you see, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I think kind of goes back to we're focused on the right areas. The areas are clear. The execution and how our culture can accelerate that are areas I feel like we can really move the needle on when it comes to kind of an innovation strategy, right? And so it was good to see the alignment on the areas. And I do think, though, as we think about talent, as we think about the process, as we think about implementation, that there are some areas we can innovate, if that makes sense.
Good.
Great, excellent. I will turn it over to Will if you're comfortable.
Will, all yours.
All right, thanks, Mike. And good to be back in the Pentagon and see some old friends and colleagues today. And just want to really thank the Defense Innovation Board and Mike for asking me to lead the task force, and for Sue Gordon.
The question is, are they happy to have you back?
What they say to you to your front versus what they say to your back can often be different things.
Thank you for your service in the past and for doing this.
It's fun. And I do know from the past, it can be really helpful to people that are in this building that are going 90 miles an hour. They're pulled by lots of different political forces. It can be helpful to have someone come in that's got a little more separation and just say what you're saying, even if you're sharing things that they know. Sometimes it's helpful just to be able to say, I just talked with the Defense Innovation Board and they told me that. So we're certainly hoping to play that role on how the department works with private investment and companies that might be considered dual use, having the ability to work in private sector, but also be able to contribute to the public sector, particularly the military. I want to thank Sue Gordon, who couldn't be here with us today, for being on the task force with me, along with Reed Hoffman. Charles Phillips, welcome to the team and welcome to the task force. We've even asked some generative AI to join our task force. One, to help with the writing, and two, it's a good reminder for us that there is a lot of innovation happening outside the DoD that's going to be transformative. This will be a very palpable reminder to us as we write the report in collaboration with AI, that we're trying to give the department advice about how to be a better partner with companies that won't just change the military, they'll change the world. In terms of how we'll be engaging, unlike the S&T study, we really need to talk to people outside the department. And it's not just startups, which you would guess we would do. We really need to speak with investors. We also need to speak with defense companies that have been working with us for decades about how they view working with companies that have a different track record than just being part of the defense industrial base only. What is the department doing to encourage or make it easier to work with such companies? Are there incentives in place? We'll look at the process, obviously. We'll look at the authorities, obviously. We'll also look at the budget. And I expect that we'll find areas that we can be useful in our suggestions in each one of them. So right after this meeting on the Defense Innovation Board website, there will be a link to a survey that separates into the type of organization we want to speak with, either investor, either startup, either defense company. And look, I know people don't like filling out surveys. I don't like filling out surveys, but we really ask that you take this on as a service to the country. We really need your input, both statistically, looking across a large number of organizations, and we want to hear your comments. We want to hear specifically what was good, what was bad, so that we can see, is that a broader trend that should be addressed. So you'll see that on our website and the DIB. You'll see it pushed out through various social media channels. Please take the 30 minutes or so that it will take to fill it out to do so. And then the Pentagon, the DoD, will select a subset of the survey filler outers to be interviewed by the DIB so that we don't just get the survey, we get some stories and anecdotes. Ultimately, we'll roll this back up, and our charter is to provide good advice on being a better partner with private sector companies, no matter what domain that recommendation is in. We're particularly excited to learn more about what Jason Rapchi is doing in the Office of Strategic Capital. Got a briefing from him this morning, and Jason's a friend and colleague from the past in the Air Force, definitely a smart guy and knows what he's doing. But we want to understand how this new office is going to fit into this broader ecosystem and ultimately make that ecosystem understandable and a better partner with companies that are growing out in the private sector. Reed, anything you want to add to our study? And then I'll talk about Charles. Dr. Mike.
I think it's an extremely important thing about how we leverage some of the advantages that we have in America in terms of the distributed network of companies, capital, talent, and innovation. And it's part of the modern, I think, modernization and modern thinking of this building. To be thinking about how to harness that and to work in tandem in order to achieve our goals of a safe and prosperous country and world.
Thanks, Reed. Charles, you've invested in a lot of companies and worked with a lot of big companies. What are your...
Okay, well, why don't we start? Hopefully everybody is tuned in. Ryan and Will, thank you. It's especially important that the strategic investment capital study be informed by real experiences and outside perspectives. So startups and tech companies, defense contractors, investors, please sign up so the department can hear from you. It really is important to get a broad range of views. We're in a sprint, as you know, to get our recommendations to the Secretary by June. So the sooner we receive input, the better. And now, before we hear from our two guest speakers, let me turn it over to you, Colleen.
Yeah,
all yours.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll have two guest speakers here, Dr. Jason Rathje and Lieutenant General Hinote. Gentlemen, we'll do about 20-25 minutes, a little bit of brief, and then I think just some good dialogue and Q&A with the board members. We will cue you on some time, so apologies in advance if you see the hand waving. So, all right, Dr. Jason Rathje, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Chairman Bloomberg and distinguished members of the panel. It's very exciting for us at OSC, probably the newest and youngest organization inside of the Department of Defense, to brief you today on the focus of the organization, why this office was established, what our strategies are in supporting our thriving innovation ecosystem, but trying to really harness the power of our American innovation ecosystem in support of national security and also long-term economic prosperity. OSC was fundamentally established to give the Department of Defense a new tool and our current competition. Because today, the United States, if we can go to the first slide, is in a global competition to be a world leader in emerging and critical technologies. Critical technologies that span a wide variety of technology areas that are not only support national security. Apologies, the briefing is the Office of Strategic Capital briefing. Technology areas such as semiconductors, advanced materials, and biotech are just as critical as those defense technologies that we consider, such as hypersonics and directed energy. These technology areas are ones that we spend billions of dollars of S&T funding into, but we require to move into products and services that our department can leverage in support of our military needs, but also lead towards long-term economic prosperity. So if we go to the next slide, winning this race is truly vital to national security and economic prosperity. Now, this is a race that we're not unfamiliar with in the United States. It's a race that we've run before. Over the last 100 or so years, we've been in cyclical races to be world leaders in critical technologies. So our office has looked at examples of where we've been in these challenges before and tried to pull forward case examples of opportunities where the U.S. government has partnered with our American innovation ecosystem to drive new capabilities. So I wanted to start this briefing today with a story about Cray Research. Cray Research is the world's first supercomputer company. Founded in the early 1970s, by the early 1980s, it provided supercomputers globally, supported many commercial industries, but also supported our position in analytics for our nuclear enterprise, helped to build a nuclear deterrence strategy, and helped us to win the Cold War. Now, a little known story about Cray Research is that in the late 1970s, they were about 3 months from going bankrupt. Cray at the time was a crazy concept. It's a small startup trying to develop a computer, a new product for a market that did not exist, against competitors much larger than itself that were much more well-positioned to own the supercomputer market. And at that time, Cray was struggling to find capital, struggling to find financing, to build a production line to establish the world's first supercomputer. Cray was fortunate that 3 SBICs existed. SBICs are government-backed investment funds. And one time in the 1960s, 2/3 of all venture capital was backed by the US government through the SBIC model. Those 3 SBICs invested $500,000 into Cray Research. That $500,000 crowded in another $2.3 million of private capital to build the world's first supercomputer that Cray sold to the Department of Energy. The second computer was sold to the Department of Defense. And within 10 years, the CFO and Cray, in a Senate testimony, discussed that without the SBIC program, Cray would not exist. Critically, it was that government partnered with investors to create efficient investment vehicles through the SBIC program that invested into Cray, did not spend R&D money, but invested into a deep tech company to build a product for a market that did not exist because it was important to national security. But it also led to another opportunity for long-term economic prosperity. Now today, we can go to the next slide. The US government, by policy, does not co-fund new investment funds in deep technology. Instead, we rely on our private capital markets to take the S&T that we fund and transition it into products and services that can be sold on the market. And ever since the 1980s, our private capital markets have thrived. Today, US private capital comprises about 50% of global private capital. The US has an incredible competitive advantage in this technology competition in our private capital markets. However, if we go to the next slide, that private capital is not doing the patient investment that many of our deep technology companies, our critical technology companies, require to scale the proverbial valley of death. For example, e-commerce receives about 3 times more investment than artificial intelligence does. but about 150 times more investment than quantum. Now, why is that? Well, private capitalists have been successful because they've been focused on high upside with low downside. Investing in companies that support consumer growth, that support software, that support low technical risk, create market opportunities to grow capital fast, and capital flows to returns. Unfortunately, this leaves our innovators, our American innovation ecosystem in these critical technology areas without direct access to capital. So it is our position in following this flow of capital markets that we need to do more. We need to do more as a government, more as a department to increase access to capital for innovators in these technology areas. We can go to the next slide. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, talks about this as part of a wider industrial strategy. We are investing in industries of the future, strengthening the resilience and security of supply chains that underpin them. With each of these investments, our goal is to crowd in private capital, not replace it, and attract patient capital to bring critical technologies to scale. This is not just a national security imperative that we maintain these industries of the future, it's also an economic imperative. Brian Deese, the National Economic Council Director, talks about this in terms of attracting investment into the industries that are required for long-term economic stability. Our modern American industrial strategy reflects a commitment to make bold investments in key areas that everyone, from academics to business leaders alike, agrees are foundational to economic growth. These investments help accelerate and shape breakneck innovation, and they encourage private investment in market competition. So the Secretary of Defense has established the Office of Strategic Capital to align private capital to national security priorities and scale private investment in critical technologies. Go to the next slide. But as we said earlier in this discussion, the devil's in the details. We know that many technology companies, that the American innovators can develop world-changing S&T. We have had incredible academic ecosystems coupled with U.S. government grant and contract funding to develop next-generation technologies across all of our critical technology areas. But how do we take that next step? How do we give these technology entrepreneurs the opportunity to take their S&T into products and services that not only support national security mission, but also long-term economic prosperity? Well, the Office of Strategic Capital is investigating two new strategies to help align and scale private investment in support of national security. The first is syndication. Syndication is a strategy that simply partners with private capital providers to co-invest in new technology efforts to help scale the business as we help scale the technology. This was a strategy that was actually pioneered under Dr. Roper's tenure as the Assistant Secretary of Acquisitions.
Well, you did most of the work, Jason. So
It was under your
I
leadership.
may have signed off on it.
The opportunity that we can provide through these programs is with existing funding, with existing R&D funding, with existing procurement funding. We can co-invest on vehicles like other transactions, innovation vehicles that allow us to cost share with private capital providers to make mutually beneficial investments that help scale technologies that is truly dual use. The other strategy, though, the more novel strategy for the department, is leverage. Leverage works to change the economics on investments in deep technology areas. Fundamentally, what leverage does is it lowers the cost of capital. Private investors can make the patient capital investments that are required at the sizes that they're required to invest in deep technology companies. Now, these strategies are ones that are not unfamiliar to the US. They're also not unfamiliar to other countries, certainly not unfamiliar in these technology areas. Perhaps the best example today of a government public-private partnership that used syndication and leverage to help finance and scale a new company is the Taiwanese government and the creation of the Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. TSMC was founded by Dr. Morris Chang, U.S. educated, worked at Texas Instruments for 25 years, had the opportunity, with partnership with the Taiwanese government, to build a fabrication shop, a manufacturing plant. But the Taiwanese government did not fund that alone. They only funded half of TSMC. The other half of TSMC came from private investors. Investors like Philips, the parent company of ASML, who was an anchor investor into TSMC. In fact, the pre-money valuation on TSMC was $0. It was a government organization. Morris Chang was a government employee. But TSMC provides us a great example, a critical technology area where a public-private partnership innovation was coupled with a business model innovation to catalyze an entire new sector and new ecosystem in Taiwan. OSC is investigating strategies like this, strategies in these technology areas where we can help increase capital flows and increase market participation across the entire area. The first program activity that we launched in December to help get after solving this problem is the SBIC Critical Technologies Initiative. This is the same SBIC program that funded companies like Cray. It also funded small companies like Apple, Intel, Sun Microsystems. When SBICs were used in the 1960s, they were used with a focus on national security. Again, we were in a strategic competition at the time. Now, in partnership with the SBA, who's been a fantastic partner with us, we've been able to bring back the SBIC program to create investment opportunities in early stage deep technology companies. Now, the way this program works is it leverages what is called the Federal Credit Program. The federal credit programs are programs where other departments and agencies utilize government loans and loan guarantees to increase leverage in technology areas and sectors, societal sectors, that we think are important to increase investment in. Great example of a federal credit program is the VA home loan program. VA home loans provide low mortgages, access to mortgages for servicemen, members, and veterans, because we as the government had taken on 20% of the risk of new mortgages for that sector of the economy. We provide a loan guarantee to banks that provide mortgages to service members through the VA home loan. Utilizing a similar structure with the authorities and the federal credit program that the SBA maintains today, one of 118 federal credit programs inside of the U.S. government, to take advantage of loan guarantees to offer leverage to new investment funds. The way these investment funds work is that we can license new limited partnerships that are vertically focused on deep technology areas, where we can provide $2 of leverage, $2 of debt for every dollar of private capital that is raised, where we match dollar for dollar with private capital providers, $2 per dollar with private capital providers, make new investment funds to create patient sources of capital for these critical technology areas. We can go to the next slide. I want to briefly mention where we're at and where we're heading. So the partnership that I just mentioned, which is the SBIC Critical Technologies Initiative, just kicked off in December. We hope to start taking applications for that initiative by early summer. We are coupling that with the publishing of our first investment strategy, which is taking a look at our critical technology areas and assessing them for capital availability, as well as liquidity opportunities. So what this does is it really helps us to tip and cue these tools to invest in the areas of these technology sectors that most require this source of capital. Lastly, we're very excited about other interagency partnerships. Of the 118 federal credit programs that exist in the U.S. government today, unfortunately, the department has none. So we rely on our interagency partnerships to help us learn how these programs operate, but also help to apply these in areas which we see mutually beneficial in support of national security. But we look forward to announcing those partnerships soon, which include opportunities to learn from things like the DOE's loan program, the export-import banks, a CTEP Counter China Transformational Exports Program, as well as the Developmental Finance Corporation, all which use equity and debt instruments in support of their mission objectives. And lastly, very soon, we hope to start making our initial investments.
Jason, thank you very much. Using financial tools and public-private partnerships as the Office of Strategic Capital is doing to spur the development of new technological capabilities, including in the energy industry, really is critical to our national security. Any of the board members have any reactions or questions for Jason?
I have a question.
Charles, go ahead.
When you look at the full investments you'll be doing and the products that are coming out of those companies, do you anticipate that all of those products will be things that the general public can use, or are they specific to the Department of Defense? How do you think about some of the investments?
Our initial thrust is for truly enabling technologies. So to your point, we think these as products that are in the industrial base that need to be absorbed into defense capabilities, things like semiconductors, right? So I like to give a story. There's a company that we often work with that is developing carbon nanotubes. They've received nearly $60 million S&T investment from the Air Force, from DARPA, from the National Science Foundation. But this company requires significant capital to get to revenue. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. They've got a great strategy, but that type of investment is for companies that are going to be operating in the margins that they're operating, is just not seen. You know, they're not operating on a software margin, they're operating on a hardware margin. But this technology is truly fundamental. It's going to support their initial market is space, but it'll support power plants. They're targeting underwater applications, they're targeting the automotive industry. So opportunities to scale and enabling technology like carbon nanotubes. Another example I give is cubic board arsenide. The replacement to silicon has 10 times the thermal conductivity of silicon. Great article came out of MIT, funded by ONR, prototyping the technology, proving it works on an integrated circuit. Unfortunately, the engineers and the Navy at the end of this article talk about how hard it's going to be to commercialize this technology. How do you get cubic board arsenide into F-35s? But also, how do we get this into the industrial base? Because we're requiring an industrial base to make sizable investments in these types of technologies to get them over the line. Investments that are going to dwarf the S&T investment that we took to get it to TRL-6. But that's not to say that we're not going to be supporting things that the department's not going to buy. Fundamentally, though, we're focused on the competition over these technology areas. And wherever those markets take us is where we're going.
What's been the initial reaction from the investor community? Any idea on time frames on when you would like to see like the first investment? Give me a sense of where
We would like to license our first funds on the SBIC program this year. We would like to license them, by the end of the summer if we can. We're very fortunate that the SBA has done a lot of the legwork on their own to get us to where we are. They've had to shift the entire debenture structure to make this possible because the existing SBIC program is not conducive to the patient long-term investments that we need for these technology areas. They've made a massive shift to the program to support an additive niche here. A conversation with the investor community is one that has been positive. It's been one that we've had to continue to advance the narrative because there is a lot of work that organizations like AppWorks and DIU are doing to help transition commercial technology into the things that we buy. And those are critical and important, but we need private investors there too. But those conversations are inherently different than seeding and changing the economics in the deep technology community to get after some of these other areas of the economy, areas that are deep within our supply chain, but areas that we certainly need to have advantage in from a national security perspective. Because if the areas that we lose, as we've seen from the CHIPS Act, it could be really hard for us to get back.
Okay. This is my question. And I do think that a market needs a deep tech office. It's just a step before where the service research and development procurement process kicks in. So in theory, I understand This sounds to me like, just like you and your colleagues hacked the current statutes and regulations to make the syndication model work. We got right up to the line of what was allowed. It sounds like the same thing is being done with the leverage model to try to hack these credit programs to make them work for defense purposes. What now that you're hacking two different kinds of systems, what needs to be changed? Like, I know you're making this fit. That's what I took away from your briefing. How should the system work ideally, in your opinion?
I think, right, and we've all been there at different starts and stops and kind of partnerships with the government. What we know is that you have to handle bringing outside in, you have to handle innovation fundamentally differently than you handle day-to-day business, right? You know, where your current organization is very successful at executing on is going to be fundamentally different than the things that may disrupt the status quo. And so what we've noticed as we, now are shifting our hacking from working directly within a service to now supporting and coordination with the interagency is that there is a strong desire to figure this out. And I'm getting that exposure now working with the interagency, working with the National Security Council, the National Economic Council. We know that we need to find ways to crowd in capital. We know we need to find ways to figure this out, and we know it is not a simple problem. It is not a one solution that's going to fix this. Just in the private capital markets alone, it's a multivariate equation we've got to assess. But I think it fundamentally comes down to, if we want to get after these problems that we've seen endemically, it's going to require service-based approaches, it's going to require DoD approaches, it's going to require an all-of-government approach. We need to change our processes to adapt. Because our current processes, even within the building, are not going to be equipped in the way, shape, and forms. And that, one of the reasons we established OSC was to create a separate structure to help figure out this specific problem.
Do you think for the time frame of investment that you think will be needed, can you survive leadership changes? Like, when you have to be slow and patient to take something that's deep tech and get it to the point that it can be commercialized, is that a risk?
It's very risk. Absolutely. I think we need to prove that these models don't work. That's why we're trying to launch a number of financial products and investment tools this year to start quickly figuring out and getting case studies and seeing what works and what doesn't. But we're also going to look to the private capital markets. If there's strong interest and we can license a new fund, I mean, we're fortunate with some of the partners that we have. The SBIC program has been around since 1950. The last 20 years, they've operated at no cost to the taxpayer, 0% subsidy, which means that we've been able to increase investment in different areas, not these areas, but other areas of the economy at no cost to the taxpayer. The efficiency of which we think these tools can be applied to these areas, as well as the operationalization to actually showcase value, is going to be our focus of the next 2 years. But I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't be honest of me to say that certainly is the risk that this goes away in 2 years.
Jason, you mentioned as a next step, the Critical Technologies Initiative will be open for applications. Can you say a little bit about the strategy of listening and attracting applications, particularly so that it's not just the usual players, and maybe there's some tap talent somewhere that needs to be brought in for solicitation?
Yes, no, that's great. I think we are launching listening sessions. Actually, we're having one with the NVCA this Friday. So we're trying to leverage those relationships to get maximum external exposure. We're also extending to the National Venture Capital Association and partnering with a number of organizations across, and I appreciate any feedback you did have and other organizations that we can bring in to help partner and bring this to other areas of the economy that are traditionally targeted by these types of programs. But we don't see this just as venture capital. We see this as private equity. We don't see this as just the coast. We see this as the middle of the country. We have a fund we're working on right now that supports industrial transformation, focused on accelerating our tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to prepare them for the future to come, hypersonics and energy and space, but also allow them faster times to produce the supply that we need today. Examples that we've seen from Ukraine. To your other point, one of the great things about the SBIC program is that they have been operating for a long time in licensing funds. And what it allows us to do is allows us to say, hey, investors, if we license this limited partnership, we provide you that debt, you actually raise the finance from us. It comes from a private bank. It's a loan guarantee. It doesn't come from us. And the limited partnership is licensed for 10 years with a 5-year additional option. So we can create 15-year funds that once they're licensed and operational, they're effectively operating as a for-profit private entity, right? We're checking in with them, we're monitoring them, but it allows us to put the funds and deploy the capital. They get to take the companies. We just say, hey, for some percentage of your portfolio, invest in fund. We negotiate that upfront.
You have control of leadership.
Of the limited partnership.
Yes.
We get to assess the investment leadership for licensing. And then ultimately there's a say if we license somebody with a certain leadership structure, that anything additional has to be.
For anything new, it's usually good to think about when something does go wrong, and it will eventually at some point, how does the system do its counterbalance? And can you avoid that being catastrophic, meaning ruining the whole thing by saying, well, let's prevent that from ever happening again by never doing it again?
Well, and when you think about federal credit programs, it would be dishonest of us not to compare Tesla and Solyndra. I mean, I think it's important for us to understand from an energy perspective, we need to take risks. We need to take risks to fight climate change. We need to take risks to provide renewable sources of energy. There's also a massive national security need in agility prime. It's a great example of where we have to take and be a leader in a space supporting electric vertical takeoff and landing. But if you look at the energy program, its loan program office has been operating at a return to the taxpayer from a portfolio perspective for years. And you still have had loans that have gone wrong, like Solyndra. But if you also had companies like Tesla, which were massive successes. And I think, to your point, it's not only an understanding of we've got to take risks in these technology areas in order to maintain competitive advantage, but we also need to balance those risks across a portfolio of investments.
The DOE program, it seems like it has a near horizon for ROI. I think that'll be a chance. The horizon will likely be longer, which means you'll be asking those looking in from the outside to be even more patient than through the other credit programs. Big messaging, at least I think it's really important to say this is the deepest of the deep tech, not the surface layer of deep tech for a loan program.
Kristen, I just wanted to say thank you. And Colleen, if you are going to introduce our next speaker.
Yes. So we have joining us as a guest speaker, Lieutenant General Clinton Highnote, with U.S. Air Force futures, really. But today, talking to us a little bit about his experience with service innovation organizations. And so, sir, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Colleen, and Chairman Bloomberg and members of the board. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. And when I walk around with this uniform around the country, I often get thanked for my service, and I appreciate that. I want to thank you for your service, and for many of you, it's another chapter in your service. So thanks for being able to come back and help us. I think it's important. I am not speaking on behalf of the department, either the Department of the Air Force or the Department of Defense today. I hope I can speak to you as Dr. Highnote and not General Highnote. Why? Because I want to be a faithful reporter to you of what I have seen since I have been in the innovation technology strategy space since 2015 when I came to work in the office of Deputy Secretary Bob Work. And with the exception of 1 year when I was in Baghdad serving in the U.S. Embassy, I've been here struggling with the adoption of innovation. And I want to be able to have that opportunity to tell you what I've seen because I think it's important to your work. And so I'm going to be, if you have seen, I handed out some slides. I'll be following them loosely. But I just want to be able to talk with you a little bit about what I have observed in those years. My thesis is pretty simple. It's that we've got access to more innovation than I think at any point in our history. It's not an access to innovation problem that we're dealing with. It's a innovation adoption problem. Now, I'm not the first one to say that, to write about it. In fact, the Atlantic Council has stood up a commission under former Secretary of Defense Esper and former Secretary of the Air Force James and it's called innovation adoption. That's what the focus is. That's a good thing. And it's where we stand right now. But why? And I think this is what we have to struggle with. Because until we begin to address some of these issues, we are going to be in the same place. My thesis, my answer to why is cultural and structural problems. Again, I'm not the first person to write about that or to talk, but I'm going to be more specific about it because I think it's important that the board is aware of how hard we have been working and how difficult it has been. So I'm going to talk to you about some barriers. I could write probably in the neighborhood of 30 or 40 off the top of my head. But what I did was, I think this might be 16 here. I've witnessed each of these. Stifle innovation on behalf of the bureaucracy and at the expense of tomorrow's warfighter. The first thing I'd say is, although I believe our leaders, and I've seen leaders on 3 different administrations, I believe our leaders do have a sense of urgency about change. It is not permeating throughout the organization. And that's unfortunate, but it is true that our department is the most diffuse organization when it comes to power I've ever seen or studied. And when that is the case, having the lack of sense of urgency in the middle is deadly. And that's what it has been for us. Oftentimes the tool that is used is, well, what do we stop doing? Well, as you can imagine, that's a really difficult thing to answer because there's a reason for everything that we're doing. Even if it's not a good reason, it is often a reason that people either it helps local interest or it serves a purpose that is allows people to stay in the know or in the process. There is a huge disagreement in this department over the timelines of risk, meaning that the actions of the department tend to focus on near-term risk, but the words of the department tend to focus on long-term risk. Why? Because we have built up a tremendous amount of long-term risk. I'll be able to talk with you more about that in a closed session. There are a lot of people in uniform, outside of uniform, that identify with the old ways of doing things, as opposed to the new disruptive ways. And so a lot of advocacy is built around an identification, people who grew up, whose identity is interwoven with a type of warfare. A good example would be fighter pilots and their airplanes. I'm a fighter pilot. So I really, really, really liked the airplanes I flew. And the folks that fly airplanes today are very, very sure that their airplane is the best airplane that ever flew. But what happens when we get to a disruptive point in aviation? Well, that tends to slow down the progress to disruption. There are a lot of soft vetoes in our department. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but it is true. And at any one point, there's so many different people, offices, interests that can block an action. They can't start an action, they can't initiate or get an action through, but they can block. And that's a fact of life in this department that makes it very difficult to keep going. There's also a culture of compliance, meaning you're incentivized to be compliant with the process over being incentivized to produce outcomes that make a difference on the warfight. I can give you numerous examples of this, and we can talk about that later. Linear processes are very difficult to overcome in our department because they are very easy to describe and write on a piece of paper. A good example would be, I have the word requirements in my title. So I work requirements on behalf of the Airmen of the Air Force. Often I am asked, what kind of capabilities will airmen need in 2038? I have no idea. And I can't write a decent requirement for 2038 in this environment. But yet that's what the bureaucracy would like, because then you, if it's far enough out, first of all, it doesn't hurt too many of the current programs. And you can have a very relaxed acquisition process to be able to meet that requirement. And you always have the requirement as your justification of being compliant. If I'm compliant with the requirement, then we must be okay. I don't know what technologies will be most prevalent, most salient in 2038. I don't know in 2030. Think I might know 2030 better than 2038. But if I don't know, and I have access to as much information as anybody has ever had, I don't know how we think a linear process will help us. And that gets into the whole lack of a requirement. Well, where's the requirement for that? Well, oftentimes what I see is technology makes things possible that no one imagined. Certainly not imagined at the level of a requirement that you would write down and put key metrics on. And oftentimes we have a lack of awareness about what really is going on in the technology space. So it's impossible for us to know how that might change warfighting because we just aren't aware of it. There is a strong not invented here culture. And you can imagine this is true in places. A good example would be some of the science and technology laboratories that we fund. And what I see is there is often a competition with the internal S&T versus the external S&T that are being driven through commercial incentives. And while I don't necessarily mind the competition between those two sides, what I do mind is when the internal organizations have a soft veto on the external organizations, and that is true today. The timelines of our budget versus the timelines of the companies that we are working with are vastly incongruent. I'm going to quote a recent DoD leader, retired now, but who just addressed the PPBE commission that Congress put together. And he said, nothing says support like come back to me in 2 years when I've got the money. I will tell you right now, there are technologies that is exactly what we are saying to these small startup companies. And it can't be true that a company, the only way that a small startup can work with the Department of Defense is that they have to self-fund for 2 years or more. But yet I have heard small startup companies tell me exactly that. So we are blessed and cursed with some of the best military technology companies in history. Those are, of course, our primes. And they have incentives of their own. And while we are so blessed to have the incredible depth of talent in those companies, we are also cursed with some of the incentives that they have. An example, when a small startup company comes forward with a disruptive way of fighting, that threatens profit margins, especially in profit margins that are built on sustainment models, meaning it's more profitable and certainly more predictable if you're sustaining equipment over a period of years, decades, versus being disrupted by a small startup that may work, may not work. And so what ends up happening sometimes is that the primes buy up interest in the small startups. And while they may say, and I think in some cases they would be accurate, that they're trying to ingest the technologies into their companies, in some cases, we know that they kill them. And that's just something that we have to deal with. And I think the last thing I'll say, and if you haven't run into this yet, you will in this space, the unfortunate lack of trust and comity between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And when we talk about the flexibility to be able to use money in ways that are different, we find that there is not a lot of trust. In fact, it was written into the appropriations bill in 2021, if I remember right, where they actually wrote, we don't trust you to be able to spend the money flexibly. And so as we think about what that requires, we're going to have to address that. It is a structural problem that we must do something about. I'm going to go through a few things here in the last few minutes, and then I'll end with a key ask, and it may be a little bit different than the type of ask that you may be used to. I believe strong leadership is necessary to address cultural and structural concerns. I think we have to encourage that strong leadership. I believe this board has a voice. You all individually have voices. That influence is important in making it better. Actors respond to incentives. I challenge this board to do something like this. Map out the incentives of the acquisition world, the services, R&E, AMS, CAPE policy, the small startups or small subcontractors versus large contractors or primes versus the committees, and it will be different for the appropriations committees and the authorizing committees. If you would take the time to map out the incentives there, you will find there was a lot of barrier and maybe some opportunity. That would be something that I think would be good for the board to look at. We've got to incentivize risk taking. The markets do it all the time. If we're not incentivized to fight better so that we can save lives and defend the country better, then I don't know what we have to do, but we got to do something because the incentives right now are lined up against rapid, scalable progress. Flexibility in the budget, I've already talked about that. Right now, that trust doesn't exist. I don't see a way over the valley of death without it. And so at some point, we're going to have to explore what types of transparency we need to get our congressional stakeholders semi-comfortable with the type of flexibility that we know we have to get to. And I think that involves a flexibility in intellectual property that we have not seen yet. We are going to need to figure out incentivizing intellectual property, but also using it to scale. An example might be that if we know we have a good missile, we'll just call it weapon missile, and we know that our partners and allies have lots of manufacturing capability. That is true today. And we know that we would need them, the people that we're going to go defend, to have this missile to deter and, if necessary, defeat an adversary. I'll talk to you about specifics of this here in the closed session. If that is true, it is in the national interest to lease the intellectual property, give it to the partner, and let them build the weapons. Because at the moment, we are not able to build enough weapons fast enough. And that's clear. Even a situation like what we have in Ukraine has challenged us. It will be an order of magnitude worse if we have to go fight a great now. So I think that as we are thinking through what we have to do, I've got one ask, and I want to tell you a story. Last week, and it could have been the last 3 years, but last week I had a senior department, and we were in a meeting like this, and we were discussing an innovative effort by the department. And we were looking for reasons to continue with this innovative effort. It happened to have the last word prime in it. And we were working through what is the importance of it? How can we leverage it? By the way, in this particular program, we have seen in one company, I'll just tell you, one company we've invested less than $50 million in BIR funds. They have raised 3 waves, a initial round and 2 series of venture capital over $800 million. Most of that $800 million is going to achieve parameters that will help us. So we're talking about this, and then I hear this from one of our senior leaders. It is, if we start developing a capability today, it won't fill until 2032. I think that one statement encapsulates the difference between the what you might call the innovative ecosystem that we are so blessed to have in our country and the governmental system, which is, are you kidding me? We can't put something, I mean, some of these technologies, a good example would be uncrewed aircraft. There are thousands of variants of uncrewed aircraft flying today. We should be able to scale uncrewed aircraft to the point in our military that any formation that needs one can have one. And I don't believe that takes 10 years. It cannot take 10 years. And I don't think any of you who are in private capital would allow anybody to say that to you. But we literally say it to ourselves all the time, and unfortunately, it's a self-fulfilling promise. What we have got to do is change the conversation, because there is nobody in the middle who hears that in a meeting and is incentivized to push the bounds of technology, to push the bounds of schedule or cost, to take risk. That's how deep it goes. And so what I'm asking the board to consider is, you do a survey and you talk to people and you see where we are today and where we need to be. I would like to see it, because eventually we've got to address the culture and the structure. I look back over many of the recommendations that previous boards and other commissions have recommended. They're all good. I certainly wouldn't disagree with any of them. Most of them have been put in place in some way. We've gotten acquisition reform. We've gotten middle tier acquisition, OTA type structures. We've got money. 800 billion plus. All of that is what we have. And we're so blessed to have the best innovation ecosystem in the world. We're not taking advantage of it because of culture and structure. And until we at least call that out and address it and incentivize people to do things differently, I don't see how it changes for tomorrow's warfighter. And because of that, I just want to say, I don't believe this is impossible. I don't believe that people want to watch innovation flounder in our department. But the incentives are structured in a way that makes it darn impossible. And until we call it out, I just don't see how it gets better. So, Mr. Chairman and the members of the board, I'm passionate about this because I've seen it happen. I've seen some successes, but a lot more failures. And I believe that we can and should take advantage of of what we've got as a country, as a private sector. We're not. That makes me frustrated, and I know that tomorrow's warfighter needs it. So thank you for being part of the team to help us get through that.
Well, the country is lucky to have you, and your enthusiasm is something that we are certainly going to hopefully build on. Does anybody have any comments or questions, Michael?
Yeah, terrific. And my sense is you're pretty close to exactly right. Do you have any thoughts in the current conflict on some of these old systems that took a long time that are performing incredibly well, and how the future would look with how to still to develop those?
Yes.
And they do take a long time and a lot of money, in addition to bringing in the technologies of the future. What's there?
It's Ukraine is an incredible example of this. So yes, systems like the surface-to-air missile systems that Russia developed over many years, as well as systems that we developed over many years, like HIMARS would be one example. So I don't want to say that military-driven innovation is off the rails. It is not. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but I will tell you, we are in the middle of some incredible military-driven innovation. And those programs are developing mostly behind the scenes, some of them in the classified world, but those are generally on track. I'll give you an example, the B-21, the Raider. We unveiled that with Northrop just before Christmas. It was conceived years ago, the requirements were made years ago, and generally the military-driven innovation is having an effect. That would be true for the planes, the tanks, the missiles that you're seeing on both sides. But what makes them so much better is the access to the commercially driven innovation. And this is where you have to give Ukraine some of the best credit that you could ever give to any fighting force. They have adopted asymmetries in data, in access to data, in being able to move data around the battle space in ways that have kept them in the ballgame when none of us gave them credit for staying in the ballgame. I've never seen data used so well. in avoiding attack and in prosecuting attack. And I don't understand why the Russians won't adapt and the Ukrainians are so good at adapting, but we still have Russians who are turning their cell phones on in combat. Well, I don't understand why, but we're going to help the Ukrainians take advantage of that. And so, with all of this together, what I think is that the military-driven innovation is something we're fortunate to have, and it needs to stay on track. And this includes things like adaptive engines and counter-infrared technology, the ability to do hypersonics in ways that we've never done before. We have two different styles of hypersonics. Both are working now. And I could go on with all the military-driven innovation. But the secret sauce that makes it so much better is in the commercial world, being driven by commercial incentives. And if we can be half as adaptive as the Ukrainians have been, then it makes all of our long-held investments in these systems all the better. And I'll be able to talk more about this when we talk about concepts.
General, slightly different topic, but could you explain why all the intelligence services seem to have been wrong about Russia's capabilities to fight the Ukrainians?
Yes, sir.
I was going to say too, sir, we might want to save that also for the closed classified session, but.
I think I could get into it
Yeah.
in an unclassified way. And I certainly don't believe that the intelligence services got it entirely wrong. What I do believe is that in the history of war, the most difficult thing to judge is the willingness of a people to fight. And that's, I think, where most of us, including me, got it wrong. I did not expect the Ukrainian people to unite behind a very powerful and well-articulated political leader and fight as well and as hard and as unified as they have. This will be true. This same dynamic will be true for any of the future conflicts where we have to come in on behalf of another nation. An example might be defending NATO's eastern flank, or defending Taiwan, or helping Taiwan defend itself, defending Japan, defending allies and partners in the South China Sea and all around the world. The willingness of the local party to fight is so decisive. And what we have found is that if we can help them be better fighters and they convince themselves to fight, that's a very powerful combination. I think that's what we saw in Ukraine.
Any other questions from the other members? Colleen, you had some public comments that we have.
Yeah, oh, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, Q, that's the best, I think that's the best articulation of the innovation challenges to the Pentagon. So I hope you'll keep using those 16.
Can I see the other 80?
Well, somebody wrote recently, I think it might have been an AEI, that you could put 95 theses on the Pentagon door. And it wouldn't be that hard to come up with. But yes, sir, we can always help you with that.
And I think I've worked with a lot of people. Don't think every officer quite like you. So for everyone listening to him, I wish we had 1,000 more people back then. I'll take 100. I'll
Okay, and I-
or not that, even to him.
100 would change the world.
Yeah. He's
Colleen has some public comments. Just want to share with.
Great. I will just go through 2 or 3 and we'll post the rest of these. I want to make sure I leave some time here for some good closing remarks. This was such a rich conversation. Thank you, everyone. Just, I think some relevant questions here, right? Will the DIB look across service innovation organizations such as AFWorks and NavalX, as well as private sector innovation factories to compare best practices?
yes.
Thumbs up on that. What is the biggest challenge to defense innovation currently? That's our live, because I think that mapped out for us.
Well, we have talked a lot about culture.
Yeah.
That's,
I think some misaligned incentives.
yeah,
Really
Yeah.
good.
but that's the culture.
Given the current geopolitical state, will the DIB look at how we work with allies and partners? That's been something folks have talked about. And then how How can the Defense Innovation Board improve relations, specifically communication between DoD and the private sector with large contractors and small businesses? So a lot of the themes I think we're hearing today.
The fact that I was married to a Brit gives us some outreach to our allies. My daughters have both American and British passports. That was a good session, and thank you to all our board members for their hard work, and I'm eager to see where the research takes us and the ideas that our group generates for the department. Let me also thank the Department of Defense Undersecretary Heidi Shue and the entire Defense Innovation Board team for putting together such a productive 2 days. Reminder that anyone can sign up to speak with the Strategic Investment Capital Task Force using the link that Will mentioned earlier. We want to hear from you. Also, a quick announcement at the summer board meeting, even though it is cold outside today, summer is coming. And then task force chairs will present to the public both findings and recommendations, which DIB members will deliberate and vote on. And we will also announce the next slate of study topics for the board. Members, any closing comments? Gilda, you first.
Just thought it was fantastic, and I wanted to say some of the challenges that Jennifer talked about. I know it's not unique to DoD.
Anybody else? Thank you all. In general, once again, thank you. And Jason, thank you for your presentation, both now and earlier sessions. Have a good summer, civil summer, I guess, and all the best.